Hello there folks, welcome back to the Chap's Guide. My name is Ash and I am your host on this journey through men's style, self-development and personal grooming. Now today an opportunity to talk about a man who has inspired many of us, and to many of us aspirational gentlemen. We have looked up to this fictional character who's been around now for most of our lifetimes, or more than my lifetime. And he is of course the iconic dresser who is able to combine a lifestyle featuring extreme physical activity, an unswerving patriotic duty to his country, but all at the same time, he is able to do all of these things whilst maintaining his sartorial composure and being that figure that we can all look up to as somebody who can dress well. And of course I am talking about James Bond, everybody's favourite super heroic secret agent and clothes horse, of course, because over the years the style which he has set for us has been something of a mentor-like relationship to many of his fellows, because perhaps we grew up in an era where our fathers no longer sort of dressed in the old world aesthetic. I mean, I'm lucky, my father was still somebody who wore a collar and tie and dressed up to go out when he went out to the evening to the pub and things like that. But for many people, that is now long in the history. And so they look at characters that they can draw inspiration from. And James Bond has been there. Since his arrival on the big screen to play Dr. No, Sean Connery played him in 1962, a long time ago. But since then, he has set the standard for people as the character was brought to life. This character that Ian Fleming wrote somewhat in his own image, somewhat parodying the image of other more, maybe vaulted, successful people throughout his life. But certainly, Bond sets the standard. And today, I'm going to look at 5 outfits from the Bond era which have really inspired me, set the standards going forward, and have changed the way we look at certain clothing through the passage of time. So, 5 outfits, and stay tuned to the end because I've got a couple of honourable mentions which it is worth thinking about too. Now the first outfit, which I think just brings the character of Bond to life, it takes us back to Dr. No, 1962, the first time we see James Bond portrayed on the screen. And of course, Sean Connery brought the character to life. And in fact, when we first meet him and he utters those words that echo through cinematic history, Bond, James Bond, he is wearing seemingly a black dinner jacket. And this is where we start the journey into formal wear and James Bond. I think James Bond has kept the dinner jacket alive over this last half century or so. I think it would have fallen into abeyance in general menswear if James Bond wasn't the champion of dressing well for men. And I'm so glad he has, because men look their best when they wear formal wear, a dinner jacket particularly. And when we see Sean Connery wearing the dinner jacket, it's actually not black. It is a midnight blue mohair jacket, which was made for Connery by renowned British tailor Anthony Sinclair from his workshops in Conduit Street, which is very near to Savile Row. It's kind of part of the Savile Row orbit of influence. And Anthony Sinclair formed a really solid relationship with Sean Connery over his run as James Bond, because Sinclair actually created many of the items of clothing and the outfits which Connery wore over his run of movies, which we now consider to be absolutely iconic. And it started with the dinner jacket. Now, at first glance, it looks like a relatively straightforward dinner jacket, but actually, as is always the case, the more simple the item, the more the details are important. And when we look at the details here, yes, it's midnight blue. You did hear me right. Quite often, things which are considered to be black are made out of midnight blue coloured material, because midnight blue, actually virtually black, it looks better under artificial lighting than black itself. It portrays the impression of black better than black, which often can look a little washed out under artificial lighting. But when you look at the garment, those beautiful satin-faced shawl lapels, absolutely iconic and delightful. I mean, I have always preferred shawl collars when it comes to dinner jackets. I've owned a few myself, got married in a shawl collared black dinner jacket. Always my first choice, rather than peak lapels, which is the other alternative, which you do tend to see. But the shawl collar, wonderful. Satin covered buttons, but the one detail on this garment, which you will rarely see on dinner jackets these days, is the satin gauntlet cuff which the sleeves have. Clearly visible in some of the images of Connery wearing this jacket, and the gauntlet cuff in effect is like a turn back at the bottom of the sleeve, and there we see the satin facing, implying that there is a satin lining to the garment. And because the dinner jacket is relatively plain, little things like this make an enormous amount of visual difference. And of course, Connery nailed it. You know, he looked superb in this garment. Of course, he's a classically handsome, extremely physically well-built man, 6 feet 2 inches in height, former bodybuilder, former Mr. Universe entrant in his time, so he fills the clothing well. But coupled with, you know, the white pleated shirt, a simple but rather small hand-tied bow tie with patent leather shoes, he set the standard for the decades which followed, and it still exists today. Absolutely one of the most iconic outfits. Bond is now sort of codependent with the dinner jacket, and long may it remain. So having looked at the first actor to portray James Bond, let's look at the last person who took on the mantle in the timeline of our favourite secret agent. And it is, of course, Daniel Craig, who brought a much more rugged and modern edge to the character, much more like the literary book version, but they also tailored him in a rather more edgy style, which I think worked well for Daniel Craig. Might not work well for everybody else in the world, but one of the suits which really caught my eye when I was looking through the sort of pantheon of suits worn by Daniel Craig was this grey sharkskin single-breasted suit which he wore in the movie Skyfall 2012, considered to be, I think, the high point of his tenure as James Bond. A great movie and actually a very great suit. Now, the suit itself was worn in the opening sequence where we see it really being put to the test. He undertakes a chase through the streets on motorbikes, vehicles, things like that. He gets shot, he has a gunfight, a fist fight, and the suit seems to bear up rather well. And I think the reason why I like this suit is because of its simplicity. Again, it's a very simple suit. Designed, in fact, by American designer Tom Ford, who styled Daniel Craig throughout the entirety of his period as James Bond. And it just is simplicity delivered well. Single-breasted, notch lapel, two-button suit. It just looks pretty good. And being what I would describe, although they describe it as grey shark skin, it is the appearance which is projected is a lighter coloured grey rather than charcoal. And on Daniel Craig, I think it works well because the suit is cut very close to the body, and that's clearly a design choice because he is an athletic, physiqued man, and the objective there is to make him look a very powerful physical presence with bulging muscles. So the suit was cut close to the body. The sleeves are a little high, allowing quite a lot of the cuff to be displayed. And in fact, I know that in some of the scenes in which he rides a motorbike whilst wearing this jacket, they had extra jackets made where the sleeves were much longer, so that the sleeve didn't ride up too far, displaying too much of the cuff. But quite simply, it's a very good execution of a suit which anybody could wear in daily activity, if perhaps cut a bit more generously to allow a bit more drape to the garment, and it would look good. Now in the movie, I almost said Connery then, Craig displays the suit with a white shirt, a woven grey tie, very similar coloured tie to the suit actually, which I fall out with a little bit. I do like to see a bit of contrast. I would have preferred maybe a burgundy or a blue tie, but there we are. They chose to dress him in slightly monochrome style, and also wearing a pair of black Crockett & Jones Tetbury chukka boots. Very functional outfit, which is perfect for a character who's going to get into a lot of scrapes and scraps. And I think for me it's one of the high points of the Daniel Craig sartorial journey as James Bond. Okay, we've seen the most recent Bond. Let us go back in time to 1983, Octopussy, a film towards the end of the run of Roger Moore as his portrayal of James Bond. He's getting a bit older, he's in his 50s. However, it's still one of my favourite and most fun portrayals of Bond, because I think what Moore brought to the role was a lot more flamboyant and humour. Some people say they don't like that. For me, I grew up with Moore. He was my Bond as a child, and I've always really had a leaning towards him. And one of his more memorable outfits was the white dinner jacket he wore in the casino scenes in Octopussy, where they're gambling for the Cartier, or the Fabergé egg rather. And it's one of the more memorable scenes, but it's actually quite a straightforward and simple garment. It was made for Moore by London tailor Douglas Hayward. Now Hayward became, much like Anthony Sinclair was the tailor for Sean Connery, Douglas Hayward was the tailor for Roger Moore throughout his time as Bond, and he very much influenced the styles which were displayed. Now he was a tailor to the movie stars of the era. He also tailored clothing for Michael Caine in his films like The Italian Job and Get Carter, and he even tailored American style icon Steve McQueen in the Thomas Crown Affair. So this was a man who knew how to portray a character well for the silver screen. Now quite simply, when we look at this suit, or this dinner jacket rather, it's white, which is very unusual, because when we see light dinner jackets they tend to be ivory, ecru, cream, basically off-white. But this one is white, and it is very simple. You will notice it's a peak lapel, single button, white. It looks to be like probably an unlined dinner jacket, because the scene is set in India. So likely to be extremely tropical climate, where it's going to be very warm. We can see that there are no adornments to the dinner jacket at all either. There's no pocket square. There's no boutonniere. It is really a pared down version of a evening attire for a gentleman in a very hot climate. You will notice that the shirt which is worn is not pleated, it's not Marcella, it's a simple single layer, very thin cotton white shirt, which Roger Moore is wearing with his black, probably silk self-tie bow tie. Exactly what a man would wear in a very, very warm climate. So I love its execution. Now Douglas Hayward was known for putting a romantic Italian style to his outfits, and I think he just pulled this one off rather well. And for me, when I think of Roger Moore at his most stylish, because some of the suits he wore were very much of their era. They were quite straight-legged in the trousers, which is less than flattering on the eye in the modern world, where we're used to more of a taper, more of a closer fitting garment. But for me, this is just executed perfectly. Worn with black trousers, this white dinner jacket, a tropical perfection. Now let's go to another one of the men who's considered to be one of the suavest Bonds, and let's go to GoldenEye 1995. We see a new man stepping into the James Bond sartorial wardrobe, and it was Pierce Brosnan. Very handsome man, very well dressed during his period of Bond as well. And with the introduction of this new decidedly suave Bond, the producers made the conscious decision to create a more postmodern look for everybody's favourite spy. And they approached Italian design house Brioni with the quest to make the clothing for this new version of Bond, decidedly stepping away from the more English, Savile Row, more militaristic style of suit which had previously been seen on our earlier Bonds. And the resulting three-piece suit which we see in GoldenEye, I think, is really a triumph in the execution of a very practical but very smart, some might say business-like suit. Now we see Brosnan. It's somewhat of a charcoal grey suit, and it's, you know, a classic notch lapel, quite wide lapels, 3 buttons, which was the fashion at the time. These days, we very rarely see 3 buttons on a suit. It's almost always 2. But back then, they liked to have a much larger closure, so you had a much smaller area at the top, at the reveal here. So the waistcoat visible underneath, very smart. Worn with a Turnbull and Asser shirt, Turnbull and Asser tie as well. Turnbull and Asser have provided shirts for James Bond throughout the entirety of all of the characters, the actors who've played the role. I think it is just a very smart way of looking at how well-dressed men demonstrated their excellence of the sartorial art in 1995. Interestingly, the actual screen-worn suit was sold by Bonhams at auction in London in, I think it was 2007, so well over a decade after the movie was made. And the suit sold for £8,640. So it commanded a premium long after it had ceased being worn by James Bond himself. But I think it's just a great little suit, you know, got a few little flourishes to it, like a ticket pocket, and it's just a really good business suit that anybody could wear in their daily lives, and it would carry you through life looking smart and elegant, just as it did for Agent 007 in the mid-90s. Now, in the final outfit of my 5 Bond stylish outfits that I think have changed the world in the way that we dress, it's a tactical outfit because, you know, Bond wears suits all the time, he wears dinner jackets all the time, but sometimes he gets to work, he does his core business. He is essentially a soldier who does the business of his country in a clandestine world. And at the beginning of The Living Daylights from 1987, we saw a new James Bond begin his journey within the Bond universe, and that was Timothy Dalton, a character who brought a much more gritty and real-world style to the Bond character. And of course he was Welsh as well, which is a nationality I share, which is always nice to appreciate in an actor. We don't get out there very much in the world. But in the opening sequences of The Living Daylights, we see our new Bond participating in a military exercise on the island, or the peninsula, of Gibraltar, in which he's being stalked by some enemy agents who are trying to kill him. And of course it's a very action-oriented scene which ends positively for our lead character at the beginning of his opening sequence. But we see him dressed in an appropriate style for that undertaking. Now, in previous action scenes where we'd seen Bond depicted, much like Roger Moore for instance, when we saw him, he wore old style military sort of battle dress with naval rank insignia displayed. But now we see Bond being brought up to the modern era, wearing a black jumpsuit with a black turtleneck, really looking the part. Those trousers, you know, big combat style trousers with pockets for all of your kit and your equipment, and the high-laced combat boots, which anybody who served in the military will recognize immediately. They're large, robust, easy lacing system on them, which allow you to undertake, you know, physical combat activity on any type of environment and know that your footwear is not going to let you down. And I think Timothy Dalton just rocked this look. You know, he's a tall guy, he's about 6'2", I think, lean, and it just looked really good on him. In comparison, in the last Bond film, No Time to Die, we saw Daniel Craig switching over into a tactical outfit, and for me that was totally contrived. We see him wearing, you know, an end peel military looking woolly pulley sweater, which when you look into it costs about £500. You know, he wears trousers also made by M. Peel. The boots he wears are combat looking boots from the brand Dana, and it's all, I don't know, inauthentic. Whereas I think when Timothy Dalton did it, it just looked really authentic, genuine, and it looked like what I imagined a character doing that job would actually have worn. Unlike when we see Daniel Craig dressed in his tactical outfit, I'm just thinking to myself, you know, is this just a cavalcade of high-end product placement made to give the impression of being a tactical outfit. There's a difference there. I think they lost a bit of the grip over authenticity and the portrayal of reality. Now there's two honourable mentions that I just want to finish up with quickly, because how can I talk about Bond's outfits and not talk about the Anthony Sinclair designed and made three-piece grey suit worn by Sean Connery in the movie GoldenEye. Now this suit has been talked about as being one of the greatest sartorial influences of all time on the silver screen, and there's good reason for that. It looks exquisite. I mean, if you look at the suit, it looks like a simple three-piece suit, and when you look at the details, notched lapel, you know, quite simple pleated trousers, quite small lapels, in fact. You know, for its era, it was perfect. And Connery wore it so well. Again, 6'2", well-built man. It's always going to look good on him. Worn with a knitted Turnbull and Asser tie and a white Turnbull and Asser shirt with those famous cocktail cuffs. It is exquisite. What man does not look at this image of Sean Connery in this suit and want to go out and buy it? I mean, I just wish I would look so good if I owned a suit like that. You can buy reproduction versions of this suit today. I believe they are in the region of about £1,600 from the modern version of Anthony Sinclair's website. Of course, Anthony Sinclair died quite a while ago now, in 1986. But, you know, they still rumble on. His designs, you can still buy them these days, made to measure. But I think this one looks superb. And finally, just to finish off, outerwear. Because a man has to dress in a cold climate too. And let me take you back to Live and Let Die, 1973. We see Roger Moore in New York, walking around in a navy double-breasted Chesterfield overcoat. It's got a hint of velvet at the rear edges of the collar, and it is super big, wide, open lapels. Oh my word, this is the epitome of how a man would like to look sharp in a cold climate, I think, and it just works so well. Designed by a man called Cyril Castle in Conduit Street in London, it just nails the look for Bond, who of course, you know, he's formerly a naval man, and we see him wearing his Royal Navy regimental tie along with his white shirt and that naval style double-breasted overcoat. It just complements the look so perfectly. Worn just below the knee, you know this is going to keep you warm. Again, you can buy reproductions of this today, around about the £1,500 mark, if you want to track them down. But for me, wow, this is what it's all about. So there you go, folks. Those were my 5 favourite Bond outfits that I've drawn out of the archive and lusted over, and a couple of honourable mentions that, you know, you just have to mention as well. I hope I've covered the ones that you liked. If there are some which I missed, let me know in the comment section below, or drop me an email. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to support the channel, just hit the like button. Subscribe to see more. You could buy me a coffee or become a patron. I make extra videos for my patrons every week, and the links to all of that are in the show notes below. So until the next time, replicate the Bond look in your life, in whichever way you'd like to. And I'll see you again very soon.